All right, hello everyone. This week we're going to talk about martyrs and demons and warriors' power. Now, this discussion of martyrs and demons ties into our previous discussion of cosmic war. Those that participate in cosmic war believe that their struggle or war will result in eventual victory. It may not happen anytime soon, but they believe that it will eventually happen. They believe that the triumphant victory may not even happen during their lifetime, but it will happen someday. So the struggle carries on. The warrior must overcome defeat and humiliation. The saga, in the context of a cosmic war, then makes their suffering explicable and noble, which may lead them to becoming a martyr. Martyr literally means witness or witness to one's faith. Martyrdom has a long history with religious traditions. Martyrdom is not only a testimony to one's commitment, but also the performance of a religious act, commonly self-sacrifice. The key term for martyrdom is sacrifice, and martyrdom provides symbols of violence conquered, or at least put in its place for the time being. Those that have made the ultimate sacrifice, dying for the cause, are revered as heroes and are used to motivate followers and increase the religious significance of the struggle. Terrorists in many different religions view themselves as martyrs if they die for a cause they believe in. It's especially prevalent among suicide bombers. In every war, there must be an enemy. In a cosmic war, the enemies are of the utmost importance because you cannot have a battle between good and evil if only good exists. And then if actual enemies aren't readily available, enemies must be invented or created. And this is not uncommon to religious terrorism. If people feel oppressed, it's quite easy to demonize a particular group or groups as enemies. But when these are not readily available, groups and movements will get more creative in how they demonize an enemy. During this process, the people targeted are dehumanized, which allows terrorists to much more easily attack and kill them. Juergensmeyer provides quite a few examples of how different terrorist groups have manufactured and dehumanized various groups of people. Also, this dehumanization makes it easier to target large groups of people, and it's why religious terrorist groups will oftentimes attack ordinary people. The ordinary people become and are representatives of whatever collective of people have been demonized as enemies. If more than one group is targeted, there generally is a primary enemy, and then you have secondary enemies after the primary. The primary enemy is often some kind of rival or political authority that directly threatens the group. So therefore, there's a common sense basis for their targeting. Secondary enemies are oftentimes not quite so clear cut. It could be a moderate leader, government authority, etc. Government authorities generally make easy secondary enemies. They're often viewed as protecting the primary enemy, and also generally do not support the notion that whatever grievance has reached the point of cosmic war. America, probably more than any other country, has been assigned this role of primary or secondary enemy. If you think through the different attacks on America or American interests, you can figure out times where there were primary enemies when America was a primary enemy, and also times when they were secondary enemies. And then sometimes these foes reach the level of cosmic foes rather than simple enemies. And they're promoted to the level of an enemy that only divine power can then subdue. And this process is called Satanization. Some of the same criteria used for cosmic war are also used when Satanizing an enemy. So in order to Satanize an opponent, they must be delegitimized. And there's a three-step process for discrediting them, humbling them, and then reducing their power. The four main stages of symbolic empowerment of a terrorist group are: 1, the world has gone awry; the foreclosure of ordinary options; Satanization and cosmic war; and then symbolic acts of power. So Satanization is part of this larger pattern where people try to make sense of the world and maintain their power over it. All right, so now we're going to move into warriors' power. Being involved in acts of violence and terrorism can be empowering to those that commit them. They feel they have power over either a real or a perceived enemy. And this feeling of empowerment is often disproportionately high compared to power actually achieved from whatever violent act has been committed. So it's more of of a symbolic empowerment, where the sense of power is more a matter of perception rather than actual power achieved. So not only do participants in cosmic war see themselves as soldiers, it's also not uncommon for actual soldiers to join these groups. Across a variety of religious ideologies, former and current soldiers have joined various terrorist groups. Participation in these wars gives people a sense of importance and destiny when they find the regular world to be stifling, dangerous, or out of control. Unlike real soldiers, soldiers in cosmic wars are often young and male from marginalized groups that experience very little empowerment. Anxiety over a variety of issues can make these men susceptible to ideologies that promise them status and power and a way to have control over something when in their regular lives, they feel like they have very little control. Now, this is obviously not an absolute, but many of those who participate in religious terrorism fit this bill. Obviously, we talked about, in some of the earlier things about some, Islamic terrorists are highly educated and whatever. So this isn't, every one of them is not, from these marginalized groups or whatever, but a lot of them are. So why does this lead to violence? Some of it can be attributed to the marginalized role in society, both secular and sexual. Failures of sexual roles has also been attributed to domestic violence, and when combined with social roles of masculinity and femininity, can lead to more public forms of violence. If we're talking about men, sexual power for men involves not only sexual competence, but also sexual control. So aversion to misplaced gender roles and other forms of sexuality, other than heterosexuality, lead them to believe it is part of a society out of control. And because this is viewed as a society-level problem, it can take on a sinister connotation and may lead members of certain cultures of violence to band together to fight. And these male bonded groups form together to try to regain control of society and return to a more traditional type society where their power and their secular and sexual roles are restored. This sort of bonding can be found in many different religious traditions throughout history. Because they believe that society is deteriorating, they look at who they believe has caused the problems, and oftentimes that will lead to the government and government authorities, which can make those entities then enemies. It also leads the terrorists to develop intense relationships with the leaders of their movements, because these groups spend spend a great deal of energy establishing trust, building personal relationships with people in their group, because they provide them with the stability they're seeking, in their world that's gone awry. So, in instances where control cannot be established within a group, they may then be more prone to violence. These groups will also participate in violent acts in an effort to show their power, and that they're on the same level as their enemies. These acts can be used to elevate the movement's credibility by showing they're on the same plane as a secular government. The groups hope to provide evidence, that their religious-based order is just as powerful as a secular government and also a viable alternative. So they may then even organize themselves, in a way that actually somewhat resembles an actual government. So then whether or not the group can actually win the war, they're waging doesn't seem to matter. They just want to portray themselves as a viable alternative to the secular government, but only in a few instances are they an actual viable alternative to the actual government. All right, so for that, I'm going to quit for this week. Be sure you complete the assignments in Blackboard. And as always, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me. I'll see you next week.